Welcome to the Alpha Koncepts Podcast, where we talk about everything in the gun culture, from training to gear and gun rights advocacy. Hi, I'm Thomas Kral, and I'll be your host for this adventure. In today's podcast, we've got something a little bit different. We've got Vince, the producer. He's going to be asking me some listener questions. Ask the instructor. So introduce yourself, Vince. Say hi.
Hi, everybody. My name is Vince, and I am one of the producers here for Alpha Koncepts, and we're going to take some listener emails and questions, and we'll see what Tom has to say about that. You ready, Tom?
Yeah, go.
All right. For the first question of Ask the Instructor, what ammo do you use for self-defense?
Okay, what I use is irrelevant. I use federal HSTs, which are a premium expanding hollow point ammunition. I think that wherever legal, it's not legal all over the United States. Places like New Jersey won't allow concealed carry with expanding hollow point ammunition. So I think that wherever legal, you should carry hollow point ammunition. The reason I say what I carry is irrelevant because people will all too often, say, hey, what ammo do you carry? What gun do you carry? And then they'll just say, well, he's an instructor. He knows what he's talking about. And they'll go out and get that exact ammo. And there's a formula for figuring out what ammunition you should carry. So what you want to do first is, again, wherever legally possible, I recommend jacketed hollow point ammunition. That's what the police carry. It's good for two reasons. It's going to stop the threat quicker because it expands upon impact with soft tissue. So more of that energy from the round is getting transferred into the threat. And two, it limits your liability because it's less likely to, once it hits the threat, it's less likely to exit. So if there's no exit wound, it's what I like to say in classes is you could be justified in shooting at your attacker, but little Susie skip rope behind the attacker, if you shoot her, you're going to have a lot of trouble. So you don't want to have an exit wound. Every single round that leaves your chamber has a lawyer attached. So know the laws, know the regulations of where you are. Make sure that hollow point ammunition is legal where you are. That's your responsibility. Assuming that it is, then what I would suggest is what you need to do is you need to do a little bit of research. You want to find a good ammunition that will pass, for example, FBI protocol tests. And basically what that is they're shooting into soft gelatin. They're seeing the expansion. They're seeing the penetration. Does it go too deep? Does it not go deep enough? And that's important to you. Again, you don't want overexpansion, but you also don't want underexpansion. Something to pay attention to is that bullets are designed by engineers, and they're designed specifically for barrel lengths. The longer the barrel, the more powder burn, the higher the velocity. The higher the velocity, the better the expansion will be. But not everybody carries a full-length firearm. So what works in a 5.5 inch, 5 1/4 inch barrel, competition barrel, might not work so well in a 3-inch micro compact. So you want to go to a good reputable source that has done the testing. Personally, I went to Lucky Gunner. I have absolutely no affiliation with Lucky Gunner, but if they want to sponsor this podcast, I wouldn't be opposed. Lucky Gunner has done really excellent testing. There's, I'm sure you can find dozens of sources that have done similar testing, but they, on their website as well as their YouTube channel, you can say, hey, I've got a 5-inch barrel and I want to see the penetration on these rounds, and they'll do comparisons. And so what I did is I looked at the expansion, I looked at the penetration, and I took about 5 or 6 of the best rounds, and I eliminated the worst. And then even more important is reliability and function checking. So then I went to my local gun store. I bought those rounds, which was a very expensive test because hollow point ammunition is significantly more expensive than full metal jacket, which is typically what we're shooting on the range. But remember, these are defensive rounds. But you have to test to make sure that they work flawlessly because you're trusting your life to this ammunition. So what I did was I did a series of tests at 15 feet. which is a typical, self-defense distance, 15 foot or less. And I looked for both reliability. I wanted absolutely zero malfunctions, and I looked at accuracy. And all of the ammunition I selected worked flawlessly. I had no problem there. It came down to accuracy because, as I said, all the ammunition I selected was within the criteria for penetration and expansion, and it came down to, for me, with my firearm, the Hornady HSTs.
All right. Well, that pretty much covers everything about ammo for self-defense. Next question is, what is the best gun for self-defense? And I know that's kind of we probably could talk about this question for days, but in your opinion, I'm imagining that what this question is, what is the best gun for self-defense?
Okay, so it goes back to the question, what's better, the Glock or the 1911? And the answer is yes. It's different for each person. Like I said, with the ammunition, you have to try what works in your gun. With a firearm, you have to try what works for you. And in my basic classes and my concealed carry classes, we talk about the fit of a firearm and the operation. For self-defense purposes, first and foremost, just for simplicity's sake, for the majority of shooters, of course, there's no blanket statements that you can say for all shooters. For the majority of shooters, I'm going to recommend a striker-fired pistol. That's going to be something like a Glock or an XDM or a P320 or, something that's a modern striker-fired pistol. These things are the most simple to operate with the least amount of user input, and that's really what you want in a self-defense situation. This is what law enforcement carries. Our military just moved over to a variant of the P320, and that's actually what I carry is a P320 made by Sig Sauer. Now, again, there's a lot of great guns out there. By far, Glock is probably the most popular brand. Smith & Wesson, M&P, I actually prefer the feel and shooting my Smith & Wesson M&P more than my P320. The reason I carry the P320, it basically came down to the modularity of the firearm. But let's talk about how you can pick one that's right for you. So there's obviously different sizes, right? You've got full size. Very few people I know carry full size, but I do know people that can comfortably carry and conceal a full size. Remember, the larger the size of the firearm, the harder it is to conceal, the heavier it will be. You've got to carry this thing all day. You may only shoot it once in your life, hopefully never, but you've got to carry it all day. So you also want to have that balance of comfort and concealability. I carry a compact size, which is a step down from the full size, and I'm lucky enough, just based on my body shape, that I can conceal this without anybody really knowing. Based on my size, I'm just average height, 5'10". I can carry that weight with a good belt without it pulling my pants down or anything, so that's fine. A lot of people are really into subcompacts and micro compacts nowadays. Those are just so much easier to conceal. So what I suggest to people is go to a gun store or go out with a friend like me who has too many firearms and try them out. And that is the most important thing. You would not buy a car without trying it out. You probably wouldn't marry somebody without going on at least one date. You have to try it out. Make sure that it fits your hand. Okay, that is I've got students in my concealed carry classes, and they come in and they've got guns that are way too big or way too small for them. You've got to make sure it fits your hand. Make sure that you can access the buttons and the levers to make sure that you don't need to break your grip, for example, to drop the magazine. Make sure if it's a double action that you can actually, I've had elderly people come in my classes, and I had one elderly lady one time, she must have been 85 years old, and she was qualifying for concealed carry, and I kid you not, she had to use both of her index fingers to work the trigger on this double action revolver. And once I realized what she was doing, it was like one or two shots in, I had never seen anyone use two fingers before. We actually put her into a 380 striker-fired pistol, and she did awesome. She just could not she didn't have the finger strength to work the trigger. So you've got to feel it, you've got to hold it, you've got to operate it, you've got to touch it, you've got to shoot it, rent the gun, try it out. A lot of ranges will actually, you call the range, see what they have. Hey, I'm interested in buying this gun, blah, blah, blah. Some ranges will work a deal out with you like, hey, it's $20-25, whatever, to rent this gun. And if you buy it, actually, we'll credit that $25 towards your purchase price. Some ranges will say, hey, $25, you can shoot for an hour and you can try as many guns as you want. So call the ranges in your area, see what kind of rental deals they have, see if they have the guns that you're thinking of purchasing. And the worst thing you can do is ask someone else, hey, what gun should I get? Because they're just going to tell you what works for them. And it might be a good starting point for you to try, but don't take it as gospel. Definitely try it out for yourself.
Okay. I think you've actually answered this question already, but we're going to put this out there. Number one, because I didn't understand the terminology at first, but what is your EDC?
Right, so I explained earlier to you, EDC means everyday carry, and I guess to some regard I did partially answer that question because everyday carry doesn't necessarily always refer to firearms, and it doesn't always refer to just firearms. It's what you would carry on your person every single day, or at least the vast majority, 90% of days. And so, of course, yes, I carry a P320. I carry the Federal HSTs. I carry a spare magazine, which I actually didn't always. And there's a reason I started doing that, and that was because I did go to the range one time. I like to cycle through my self-defense ammunition. Every 6 months is more often than necessary. The United States Concealed Carry Association recommends every year. There's people that'll be very quick to point out that ammunition really generally doesn't go bad, and they're right. But you also are, again, relying on this ammunition, so it's a good idea to cycle through it. But I went to the range. And, I was, okay, well, I'm going to cycle through my ammo. I bought a new box of HSTs, put them off to the side, and I'm going to shoot this magazine first. Pulled out my pistol, and I went to shoot. I had a malfunction, dropped the magazine, and it was a spring malfunction. Basically, the rounds were not feeding. The spring was stuck all the way down. Now, that was not on my P320. That's what prompted me to purchase a different self-defense firearm, concealed carry firearm. But ever since then, I decided carrying a spare magazine was a very prudent thing to do because the fact of the matter is you're more likely to have a magazine malfunction than an actual firearm malfunction if you're carrying good quality ammo and you know how to operate your gun. I also carry a knife. I have carried a knife on my person since I was 17 years old. I've just always had this on my person everywhere I go. And I know there's probably some people right now freaking out. Oh my God, he carries 2 lethal weapons. I hope he carries some non-lethal weapons. And the answer is, I'm starting to. I'm trying to become more consistent with carrying a flashlight. And I know a lot of people don't think of flashlights as weapons, but they are excellent self-defense tools. Not just self-defense tools, but like my knife, for example. I use my knife a couple times a week. I'm opening boxes, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. The knife comes out of my pocket a few times a week. I'm using it I've never stabbed anybody, but I use my knife all the time. So it's a tool. The flashlight, again, you can use as, guess what? A flashlight to see things when it's dark out. If you get a proper flashlight, let's say like 600 lumens, that's going to blind most people, especially at night. So if a attacker comes at you and you shine 600 lumens or even 1,000 lumens nowadays, you can carry pocket size 1,000 lumens in your pocket. I mean, that's crazy. Whereas like 10 years ago, 1,000 lumens, you would need a car battery or something. You can carry this kind of power in your pocket nowadays. You could absolutely blind an attacker. They won't be able to, they will flinch. They won't be able to come at you or see you or as you're making an escape and you're getting a little bit of distance. Also, it's an improvised impact weapon. You can actually smack them upside the head. Some of them will have slightly sharpened bezels to just create a little bit more point of impact. I carry the Surefire. I forgot exactly which model it is, but it was about $94. Now, again, there are much cheaper flashlights. You can go down in lumen. 400 lumen will probably work almost as well as 600 lumen. There's other brands. Olight is a manufacturer of a good entry-level flashlight. So that's something that you might want to look into if you don't have a $100 budget. I'm trying to work flashlights into that rotation as well.
Okay. Let's move on to the next question. And I imagine this is going to move into like dominant eye type stuff and sight picture. So should I shoot with both eyes open?
Well, the answer is it depends. And it depends on a lot of things. What are you shooting? Okay, are you shooting handgun? Are you shooting a rifle? Are you shooting a precision rifle? Are you shooting close quarters rifle? So, what kind of optic you have on your firearm? If I'm shooting a precision rifle, then yes, of course, I'm looking through a scope. I'm going to close one eye. If I'm, shooting my AR-15 with a red dot, which is set up for, close quarters like home defense, there's absolutely no reason to close an eye with that type of setup. Now, when you get into handguns, and those are two things that very little controversy. I believe everybody listening is probably going to agree. But now when we get to handguns, people like to argue, and that's one thing gun owners do very, very well, is they like to bicker and argue with each other. So the answer is shoot with, if you're shooting defensively, right, which is basically, my cup of tea is a self-defense instructor. If you're shooting defensively, then there's what they call threat-focused shooting. If someone's charging at you with a knife, for example, your focus is going to be on the threat. So we want to do what the body does naturally and work with that. We want to, bring that firearm up into our line of sight. And while we're focusing on the threat, get a flash sight picture, or just basically have that front sight anywhere within the thoracic of the threat. And we will be defensively accurate with our hits. When we start to move further back or our target starts to shrink in size, you might need to close an eye. Now, there's a lot of people who will say, well, no, you never want to close an eye in a defensive situation. But I'm going to tell you what, 3 years ago, I used to shoot with both eyes open at any distance. It's something I had to train myself to do. It was something I was proud I was able to do. But about 3 years ago, my eyes really started, I'm 42 now. And my eyes, that's not old, but it's old enough that I'm starting to feel the effects a little bit of age. My eyes started going downhill. Occasionally, I will find myself closing an eye to get that proper sight picture. So it's one of those things where I'm not going to dictate to students what they do. Hey, if you need to close your eye to take a shot, then close your eye to take that shot. But again, at defensive distances, 12 feet, 9 feet, you don't need to close your eyes to get a defensively accurate hit. If you train yourself to shoot with both eyes open, there are, again, like anything, pros and cons. The pro being that you have a more peripheral vision. The con being that, your eye dominance, which you mentioned, if you're not aligning that sights, the front sight, rear sight with your dominant eye, you actually could be shooting off to the side. So that's something also that we'll cover in basic class. We'll let people know what their eye dominance is so that when they do close an eye, it'll be their non-dominant eye. But realistically, naturally, and instinctively, 99% of the time, they're going to close their non-dominant eye anyways. So it's not something we really need to teach to too many people, but it has come up sometimes where it's like they're actually closing the wrong eye and they're wondering why their shot is going, 6 inches to the left consistently, and we'll figure out their eye dominance, have them close the other eye. But again, it really depends on the shooter. It really depends on what you're shooting. It really depends on the difference. It's on the distance. It's impossible to give a blanket answer to that question without identifying all the variables.
Okay. Next question is something that I didn't even know was a thing. So is self-defense insurance a scam?
All right, so let's clarify. There are very few actual self-defense insurances, okay? When we talk about self-defense insurance, we have to be very clear and understand that insurance has a very legal definition, which places a lot of requirements on the company that's offering this, let's just call it coverage. Most of these companies market themselves as a service policy, okay? And I know generically people, myself included, will sometimes refer to it as self-defense insurance, but we have to be very specific, and just so everyone understands that most of these companies aren't actually insurance. So now that we've got that out of the way, is it a scam? Well, it depends upon the company, to be honest with you, because
And this is not like you can't get this at State Farm or Allstate.
State Farm would probably sell you an umbrella policy. Okay, now you might have some coverage in your, might be like $1,000 or something, added to your policy. If you went to like your home broker who has your home policy and you asked for like an umbrella, and you explained, will the umbrella cover self-defense? There's a strong likelihood that yes, you could get an umbrella policy through your insurance broker, and that then indeed would be insurance. You would also want to make a question, will this be prepay or will this be post-pay? Because one of the legal things about insurance is they can't reimburse you, or they can't pay out for an illegal act, right? So if your act of self-defense, if you're in court proving your innocence, up until that point, is it legal? Well, until the judge or the jury decides, it's in limbo, correct? Yeah. So they can't pay you out if it's an illegal act. Therefore, it's generally going to be a post-pay policy. So let me ask you this question. How much do you think it costs, on average, to defend yourself for a justified act of self-defense, to go to court and prove your innocence, if you have to go to court?
$1 million.
Well, okay, so that's an extreme example, right? That's not the average. The Martin Zimmerman case, Zimmerman, I believe, I'm sure if I'm wrong, someone's going to correct me, and that's good. You should.
Well, this drags on for a long time.
Right.
No matter how clear-cut justified this is, this goes on for a long time. Correct?
Absolutely. And so, you're going to have expert witnesses, and you're going to have all sorts of different people that will be testifying on your behalf. So the Zimmerman case, the article I read said it was $2 million. And again, that's an extreme example. $2 million just in legal fees for your lawyer, for the expert witnesses, for all the, scientists and testing the evidence on your behalf. Because, of course, you're not going to trust the prosecutors, people, to be testing the evidence for powder burn and things like that. You're going to want your own independent scientists. So there's a whole slew of experts that will be testifying on your behalf if you have the money, right? And if you don't have the money, well, they're good people, but they're not going to do it for free. According to the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Association, I believe, if off the top of my head, it was like $100,000 or $150,000 for an average case. So if you don't have $150,000 sitting in your bank account right now that you literally could just flush down the toilet, then in my opinion, it's a good idea to have some kind of legal coverage. So is it a scam? Again, depending on the type of company. So there's, again, Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. I'm an affiliate instructor. They are a good I tell people it's a great entry-level company, and what I mean is they're very cost-effective. It's something off the top of my head like $150 a year for one person. The difference between them and some of the other companies is what they do is, per their agreement, they'll give you, off the top of my head, these numbers could change, but it's like $10,000 for retainer and bond. After, if it exceeds that point, because what you have to understand, guys, is if you're ever involved in a self-defense shooting, you will be detained. Now, you might not be arrested, charges might not be filed, but you're probably going to spend, a little bit of time in the police station. Certainly, they're going to be asking you some questions, and you want to have a lawyer present for that, and lawyers aren't going to do that for free. So you got to figure, I don't know, $5,000-$6,000 just to have them show up, and talk to you, have a conversation with you. So they'll drop $10,000, and then if it gets beyond that point, then it goes to their council, their committee, and they'll decide, was this, in our opinion, based on the evidence we have now, a justified act of self-defense? If it was, they'll commit additional money to your case. So So that's something, that to be considered is you may or may not get additional money depending upon the specifics of your case. Then there's other good companies like United States Concealed Carry Association, CCW Safe. These are, two of the more popular names. And they have different levels. Again, I'm going to call it a policy, but it's not insurance. Neither of these companies are offering insurance. It's a different package, so to speak. If you pay X amount of dollars per month, then you'll get this much in criminal liability and this much in civil liability. So you really have to look at each policy different. I would not throw out any names out there that I thought would just take your money and not cover a justified act of self-defense. I will also say that there are certain things such as red flag laws that will not be covered. United States Concealed Carry Association set up a secondary foundation, and this is available to members and non-members, and it's done on a case-by-case basis. If you have something that's not self-defense related, it might be red flag. It might be like the gentleman who landed in New Jersey with or maybe it was New York with his handgun and was arrested. That's not self-defense, but the United States Concealed Carry Foundation decided to cover the legal fees on that. So those are just things to really, you've got to sit down, you've got to look at the company, the reputation of the company, and the specific package that you're interested in. What's in your budget? What specifically does that cover? Do they cover just firearm uses? Will they cover any act of self-defense, such as unarmed, such as with a knife, such as with your vehicle? Obviously, vehicular defense nowadays is a thing with the riots and things that are going on. So that's something you need to be aware of. Will they cover the vehicle? Because some insurance companies, some of these service policy companies will only cover you with a firearm and where you're licensed to carry that firearm. So, let's say I go to New Jersey where my license is not recognized and I do have to use my knife or I do have to use a vehicle. I want to make sure I'm covered. And so those are things that you definitely need to ask the company individually and specifically. And we can go on for days discussing it, each and every single company that's out there. But those are the things that you need to do to make a comparison on your behalf.
Okay. Next question. Is it safe to leave ammo in my car during summer?
So a lot of people, especially new shooters, people in concealed carry class often will ask this question about leaving ammunition in the car. And the implication is if this comes up when we're talking about gun-free zones in Illinois, because in Illinois, gun-free zones do carry the force of law. I recommend that people carry your gun whenever, wherever legally possible. But sometimes it's not legally possible. So, some people will say, well, concealed means concealed and ignore the sign. And I say, when you're willing to go into the courthouse with your gun, then that slogan has some merit. Up until that point, shop elsewhere. But let's say, for example, I've got to go to the courthouse. There's metal detectors. I'm not going to carry my gun past the metal detector because I don't really feel like losing the gun and spending a day or two in jail, probably the day, right? But you got to leave it somewhere. So you're going to leave it in your vehicle. And it's 95 degrees out. What's going to happen to that ammunition? Well, God bless the Mythbusters because they tested this. And they came up with, off the top of my head, if I remember correctly, it was like 350 degrees. That's what it takes to make your ammunition what they call cook-off, which is to auto-ignite or to self-ignite. So 350 degrees is what it would take to make that gun go bang. And you just aren't going to get those levels inside of a vehicle in the summertime. I mean, if you are getting that kind of heat within your vehicle, I couldn't even fathom what the temperature is outside, and we've got bigger problems.
Yeah, I mean, try sticking your head in the oven for a second when you're, cooking something at 350 degrees. It's pretty ridiculous.
I've never done that, and I don't think I will.
Well, you definitely couldn't get something out of the oven without a pair of oven mitts,
Correct.
right? And
yeah.
So just put that in perspective. Next question is carry around in the chamber, yes or no? And I know that some people who have like revolvers will leave that one chamber open. So if there have 6 rounds in that capability for that revolver, they'll have 5 rounds available to them for shooting because they have that where the hammer sits in an empty chamber.
Sure. That is a very, very, very old school safety method. I can't remember exactly the company. It may have been Charter Arms. It may have been Taurus. But one company, I believe, again, can't remember the year, but it was in the 70s. They came out with a safety device, which is the hammer block. That eliminated the need to carry on an empty chamber with a revolver. What could happen potentially with old revolvers was if you hit the hammer hard enough, you could actually knock a round off.
Like if you dropped it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But nowadays, modern firearms have internal drop safeties. Again, the revolvers are going to have the hammer block. So it's not going to be an issue. And think about this, though, right? You've got 6 rounds in a revolver. You're already placing yourself at a disadvantage versus a modern striker fire pistol, which could be 12 or 15 round capacity. Hell, if you're carrying full size, it might be 17 or 20 round capacity, right? So you're already at a disadvantage ammunition wise. There'll be people saying, well, if you need more than one shot, then yeah, well, that's really not true in defensive situations. In our defensive pistol classes, we generally tell people 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it takes. In fact, there was a situation in East Ohio, a few months ago, and it was a domestic violence situation, and the police, 2 officers shot off something like 11 or 14 rounds before the guy dropped. So yeah, you're kind of placing yourself at a disadvantage just by carrying a revolver. I get it, there's a place in it, absolutely. But when you then take one round out, that places you at a disadvantage. But believe it or not, people are doing this with semi-automatic pistols as well. And it really comes down to their own comfort, right? It's really people that are just starting to carry firearms and are afraid it's going to go off. You gotta look at it like this, okay? I carry with a round in the chamber because I have been in car accidents before, and I know that I would have never had time to put on my seatbelt, right? And self-defense situations are exactly like a car accident. They're fast, they're brutal, they're bam, before you know it, and it's in your face. And I have seen multiple video of people that have died trying to chamber a round. If you're considering carrying that way, then you need to train. Your zone of awareness needs to increase. We generally tell students 21-foot minimum, generally a 30-foot zone of awareness, paying attention to the people that are around you. The reason being, it's based upon how fast you can actually draw your firearm and how fast a person can close the distance. There's the Tuller Principle. The Tuller Principle is that the average male can close a distance of 21 foot in a second and a half, which coincidentally is how fast it takes the average person to draw their firearm and put 2 defensively accurate hits on target. Think about that. If it takes the average person a second and a half to draw their firearm with a round in the chamber and put 2 hits on target, you're going to add half a second to a second if you carry on an empty chamber. What does your zone of awareness need to be? I'm not a fan of manual safeties on defensive firearms, but if you're at that comfort level where you're considering carrying with an empty chamber, I would much rather prefer training a student to disengage a safety than rack a round. So you just have to understand that you're placing yourself at a disadvantage when you carry on an empty chamber, be it revolver or semi-automatic. It's a brick. It's a brick is what it is if it's an empty chamber semi-automatic. You might not have the time you need to get that round in the chamber and save your life.
Can we expand this question here? Because I've seen this before, and I don't know if it's my old school like safety training. And when I say old school, it's my dad slapping me upside the head when, he was teaching me how to shoot, like if I did something wrong. What about holstering with the hammer back?
Depends on the type of firearm. Many of the firearms are designed to 1911, right? It's designed to be cocked and locked, right? Cocked meaning hammer back, locked meaning safety engaged. That is the manual of arms for that firearm. That's how it's designed to be carried. will you have time to, on a single action only, right? We have to define the firearm, okay? A single action only is a firearm that will only fire in single action, which means that the hammer has to be cocked either by manually using your thumb to cock the hammer, or by using the slide, which will cock the hammer. If you don't do one of those two things, then it will never fire no matter how hard you pull on that trigger. If you carry with the hammer forward on a single action only, then you have to cock that hammer, or it will not fire. That's the same principle as carrying with an empty chamber. You've got to train to make that part of your draw stroke if that's what you're going to do, but keep in mind you're placing yourself at a significant disadvantage. Now, if you carry what they call a double action, single action, okay, which means that the first round is a long, heavy trigger pull, which is double action. It's long and heavy because it's manually cocking the hammer by pressing the trigger, so it's performing two functions in the double action. That's why it's called double action, because it performs two functions. It cocks the hammer and then drops the hammer. Then each subsequent shot would be single action, because when you shoot the shot off and the recoil causes the slide to reciprocate, that's going to cock the hammer for the follow-up shot. So your first shot would be double action, and your subsequent shots would be single action. So while a single action only is designed and meant to be carried with the hammer back, double action, single action are designed to be carried with the hammer forward. So it depends.
Okay. Next question. What distance should I be training for self-defense shooting?
So in our defensive pistol classes, according to all the statistics I've read, according to the United States Concealed Carry Association, defensive shooting fundamentals, generally speaking, not even generally, but self-defense shootings occur within 9 to 15 feet. And that's a high statistic, something like 86%. And now I'm quoting numbers off the top of my head, but I'm confident between that 9 and 15 feet. In fact, in our defensive shooting fundamentals class, we will generally train at about 12 feet, which is right in the middle there. Tom Givens from Range Master, he is the gentleman who really started tracking that information, and basically looking at body cam footage, looking at closed circuit TV footage, looking at officer-involved shootings, whatever statistics he could get his hands on, he compiled that information, and it's widely accepted as being kind of the standard for self-defense shootings. So, it's up close, it's personal, it's in your face. I mean, it's on top of you. You literally can be shooting, with one hand or the other hand blocking, they're swinging at you and you're blocking that, and you're just shooting using your body's natural alignment. So
how many seconds did you say that the average person can close that distance at 12 feet?
So according to the Tuller Principle, it's 1.5 seconds, 21 foot. So think about that. Anyone who is we go to the range and we practice and we do our holster draws. Maybe we're doing them at home dry fire. We should be doing them at home dry fire. And we're in a mode where we're ready to draw our holster, a firearm from our holster, right? But we're out on the street and we're thinking about 100 different things. And please be aware of your surroundings. Condition yellow means being aware of your surroundings. That's going to be a surprise to you. You might be at the convenience store paying for a coffee or something, and someone comes up behind you with an axe, which happened in Australia, and it didn't end well for the store patrons, and it was completely due to their lack of awareness. Both of the patrons could have gotten away, but think about that. What's the distance in a convenience store standing in line? Well, nowadays with social distancing, it's 6 feet, right? But before all this social distancing stuff, it was, they were an elbow length away from you, 1.5 feet, 2 feet, right? So you got to pay attention to the people that are around you, because when they're in that bubble, they will be on you before you can get your firearm out. And there's something to be said about unarmed self-defense. The firearm cannot be your only tool. You have to kind of be able to make distance sometimes. You might not be able to go for that firearm. You might have to deal with that immediate problem. And that immediate problem might be fists. So, you just got to be prepared.
Okay. Let's see. where are we? Bullets forward or bullets backward on your spare magazine?
Excellent question. Again, gun owners love to argue, and this is one of the things that we'll argue about. And I'm going to introduce another option. When I took my USCCA defensive pistol instructor.
Before we get, you're talking about magazines that are on your belt so that when you need to reload, you're just instinctively picking them up, and now the bullets are neither facing forward or facing backwards, right?
Absolutely correct.
Okay.
Yes. So let's say like a police officer would carry, typically most police officers will have 2 extra magazines on their weak side. So most people are right-handed, so they'll have 2 magazines on their left side. Okay. So if it's bullets forward, that means the magazine is pointed in such a way that when they pull that magazine straight out of the pouch, the bullet is facing towards the bad guy. Okay, bullets backwards is obviously the magazine is facing away, the bullet is facing away from the bad guy. So it actually takes minutely less body movement if the bullet is carried backwards. Generally speaking, the most common method of carry is for the bullet to be facing forwards. But when the bullet is facing forwards, you have to understand that it's an easier release from that magazine pouch. But then as you're inserting it, you have to just do a slight rotation of your wrist. It's not a big deal. That's how most people actually do it. In the United States Concealed Carry Association defensive pistol training, they actually recommend, if you haven't built in the muscle memory of carrying the bullet forward, if you're just starting out, to carry it backwards, because when it is backwards, you just swipe it and it's straight up. You don't have that slight flick of the wrist that you need when you carry it forwards. I'll tell you what, my personal opinion, it does not matter forwards or backwards as long as it's consistently the same each and every single time. If you carry forwards, always carry forwards. If you carry backwards, always carry backwards. If you carry multiple magazines, both magazines are forwards or backwards. Okay, consistency is key here. Now, as I was saying, there's the one other option, which actually is how I carry. When I did my training class to become an instructor, my training counselor, who is the instructor of the instructor, he was carrying horizontally, and I hadn't seen that before, and that intrigued me. I went out and I bought an adjustable horizontal magazine carrier, and now I actually carry with my bullets facing down. The magazine is not sitting vertically on my belt, it's sitting horizontally on my belt. I find this much easier to conceal. I find it much more comfortable. And I should point out, much easier to conceal if I have an untucked shirt. I find it much more comfortable, especially when sitting. I bump into fewer things, like when I go through doorways around a corner. I was notorious for bumping my magazine into the wall. So I don't do that anymore. So again, the question is consistency. The answer, always the same. However you do it, try to always do it the same so that you have the muscle memory is always the same.
Well, I think to visualize this question, you got to remember that when your magazine is in your magazine carrier, it's upside down.
Yes.
So there's going to be some kind of twist that you have to make in order to insert that magazine.
Absolutely.
So, but I'd like, whatever you're doing, just keep consistency.
Correct. To argue about forward or backwards, it's like arguing about the Glock or 1911, arguing about the AR-15 or the AK-47. It's just one of those
You're really
things.
splitting hairs, right?
You're splitting hairs at that point, because either way, you're not placing yourself at a disadvantage one way or the other. Again, that slight flick of the wrist is so, you come out to a defensive class, we'll try it both ways. You'll see that slight flick of the wrist is just not even worthy of discussion. Just be consistent about how you do it.
Okay, this is the next question. If you're a revolver guy, you can go to the bathroom now or, grab a sandwich. Should I use the slide stop or overhand rack?
Right. So what that's referring to is When you're, let's say, reloading, for example, or clearing a malfunction, how do you send the slide forward? How do you chamber that next round? So explaining the function of a semi-automatic pistol, you load the rounds into the magazine, you load the magazine into the firearm, and then when the slide, which reciprocates back and forth, when it goes forward, it will strip a round off the magazine, and it will chamber that round into the chamber. So there's two ways of doing this. Either you take your hand and you pull that slide back and let go, and then the spring will send the slide forward, or there's a little lever off on the side that is called a slide stop, and if you hit the slide stop, you will then again engage the spring to send the slide forward. And both work, but one works better. First off, I have seen, let me just say, with using the slide stop, I have seen people's guns, Marcus, if you're listening, I'm talking to you, where they've used the slide stop so much that it's actually worn down to the point that you just set the gun down, and that little bit of impact of just setting the gun down, the corner is rounded off so much that the slide will not physically stay back, and that is an unsafe firearm. So that can be corrected with a file, but consistent use, you're going to keep wearing that down. So that's something that definitely needs to be considered. In our defensive shooting classes, we always advocate, whenever humanly possible, to do what we call bear paw, and that means just coming up over the top, gripping that slide with your full hand, with the palm and the fingertips. You're going to do a pull back, push pull method, where you're pulling back with your weak hand, pushing forward with your strong hand, and letting go and letting the spring do the work. And the reason people are going to argue, right? Of course. Oh, yeah, but it's faster to just hit the slide stop and use it as a release. It is. No doubt about it. You're going to save half a second. 100% agree. But what's more consistent? What is more consistent when we're doing malfunctions, for example, we're doing malfunction drills, and we have to bear paw. You can't use the slide stop with most of the malfunction drills, right? You have to operate that safety. So we want to, in a defensive situation where, your brain changes, right? We're no longer thinking, and now we're reacting, and we're reverting to our instincts and our intuitive learned body motions, the muscle memory. We want to be as uncomplicated as possible. And if I learn two different methods of doing the same thing, if I have two methods for sending that slide forward, I have to stop and think about how I'm going to send that slide forward. That's how the human brain works. So I just want to have one method and one method only to send the slide forward. That's going to work if I'm reloading. That's going to work if I'm doing a malfunction. The other thing to think about is some firearms. Let's say you're doing a reload and your slide is already forward for whatever reason. All right, and you're doing an emergency reload, you're in the middle of a gunfight, you have to insert your magazine, and you've trained yourself on your reloads, I'm going to use that slide stop as a release. But your slide is already forward, and you hit instinctively or intuitively, because that's how you've trained yourself, you hit that slide stop to release. It's going to do nothing because it's already forward. Okay, now you have to take a second to diagnose what the problem is, and now you have to think about how to solve the problem, and now you're going to do what? You're going to overhand rack. You're going to bear paw. Why don't you just do it in the first place? It's going to work 100% of the time. Let's talk about picking up a unfamiliar firearm. The levers are in different places. Some concealed carry firearms, that slide stop is so small, it's hard to get. What if your hands are sweaty? What if your hands are bloody? You're placing yourself at a disadvantage when you use a slide stop as a slide release. Bear paw overhand rack is going to work 100% of the time. Slide stop, slide release will not work 100% of the time, and therefore overhand rack is the way I go.
All right, well, those should wrap up the questions for now, and I think we covered a lot of topics here. So please keep your questions coming in. Tom, where can we send these questions?
Yeah, I set up a page on my website, alphakoncepts.com/podcast. So you can go to alphakoncepts.com/podcast. You can see all the sites where the podcast is hosted, and there's a contact form. And we'll do our best to get back in touch with you. We can't answer every single question, but we're going to do our best to answer as many questions on the air as we can. And we need your input to keep this segment going. And I actually had a lot of fun. So again, alphakoncepts.com/podcast, and you can use the contact form there and and send your question. If you have an advertising inquiry, you can also use that contact form, and someone would get back in touch with you as well. So that's the place to be. If you have any questions about this podcast, if you want to see where else the podcast is hosted, alphakoncepts.com/podcast. And by the way, Koncepts is spelled with a K. Well, then I guess that's going to wrap it up for today. I appreciate everybody who listened. Definitely be sure to subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends about it. We're growing slowly, and I think we have got some valuable information for the gun culture to hear, and we've got some more great guests that are lined up, and we're going to keep recording for as long as you want to listen. As always, everybody, be armed, be trained, and be alpha.